So now that I have my basic loading screen, I want to focus on the level 1 build. And the basic concept here is that I want to look at some really basic textures, some basic tiled textures that I could use to build a simple level based on a series of cubes. So I'm just going to jump in and I'm going to download the textures folder that I've provided here. It's the textures zip, and I've unzipped that on my desktop, and I'll just double click and I'll give you a quick preview of the content that I'm looking at. I have some basic bricks, some dirt, different versions of grass, just some really simple materials that can be tiled that I can use to create some cubes, and I can build most of my environment based on these cubes. Now this is just one strategy. I'll share with you a couple of different strategies to get the level built, but this is a really quick way to start building some assets that your marble can interact with. So I'm going to jump back into Unity, and I'm going to make sure that I'm working on level 1. I'll revisit the loading screen a little bit later. Once we push through some of the main presentation, we'll make a pass to refine this game a little bit more thoroughly. I'm going to focus on the textures here for a bit, and I want to introduce these textures into Unity. And the way that I'm going to do this is I'm just going to create a simple cube. I'll go to the game objects, create other. I'll choose a cube. I'm going to make sure that that position is zeroed out just for a reference point. And I've noticed that as I'm building this cube, I can't see the cube because it's underneath the terrain. I think my terrain's a little bit higher than the cube. And I want to make sure in this case that my cubes are positioned in a nice clean space, a nice clean position. In this case, 0, 0, 0 is the place that I want to get started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the terrain and I'm going to move that down just so I can start to see that cube. There we go. And now I'll reselect the cube and I'll double click on it to zoom in on it. Now the reason I move that down is because I want to be able to start stacking cubes. And in this case, my cube is at a scale of 1. I might decide to change that later, but currently, if I right click on this cube and I duplicate it, I get an exact duplicate of the cube. It's in the same exact position. And if I want to change that and stack this cube right next to it, I can just change the X or the Y or the Z value, or all of them, to 1. And once I do that, I get a cube that's stacked just next to it according to the position change on whatever axis. Okay, so I can do that again. I can duplicate. I can take the next cube that I've created, type in 2, and so on. So I can build up a system of cubes, and I can build an entire level or an entire platform based on some simple shapes. Okay. Now they're not very interesting to look at here, so I'm going to get rid of the originals. I'll keep just one cube for the sake of the demonstration. The next thing that I want to do is I want to implement some of these textures. And the easiest way to do this is just to drag the textures folder into my assets folder inside Unity. That'll make a duplicate of the folder inside the assets folder, and now that's in the search path of Unity, so I can use these assets, these textures, and apply them to any simple objects that I have inside Unity. So in this case, maybe I want to get started with these stone tiles. I'll grab the stone tiles too, and I can just simply click, drag, and drop onto the object. Now once I do that, if I go back to the assets folder, you'll notice that I have a textures folder, and once I start implementing these textures, Unity converts these to materials. And so if I look at the material, there's a simple material that's been generated based on the texture that I've dragged onto the object. Okay, so I've made a textures folder, which are bitmap or JPEGs or PNGs that I've introduced into Unity. Unity converts those, once I apply them, to a material that's inside the materials folder. So I'm just going to create another game object. I'll create other, and I'll create another cube. And again, because this is being created at 0, 0, 0, okay, I know that I can move that in along one axis according to the size of the scale, and I have those matched up perfectly, so they're meeting edge to edge. Okay, so, and I'll just kind of rough this over. I'll just move that over just a little bit, and I see that's moving in the negative Z direction, so I'll just round that off to Z -1. I'm going to go back into my textures. I'll grab maybe this dark grass texture and I'll drag and drop. And so now I got a couple of different blocks that I can play with. So I'll start to build up a really simple scene. In fact, what I'll do is I'll name these cubes. I'll just rename this. I'll name this, this is stone 02 because I have two different stone tiles. I'll rename this cube. This is the grass dark, so I'll just call this grass dark. And so now I know what these objects are, and so when I duplicate that object, and I'll just move this over according to X to 0, and I can start building up some simple assets. So I'll build up a pretty complicated platform here, something that my marble can interact with, and I'll position these cubes around in space. And I have the benefit of these different textures to kind of differentiate the environment that I'm interacting with. And so I can use these cubes, and in future presentations I'll start to animate some of these cubes and make them a little bit more hazardous, but we'll do that in the next presentation. So download the textures folder, integrate that. These textures, most of these I found out on the web. We'll create some of our own custom textures here in future presentations. But these are just textures that I found out on the web that were available for free, and I paid special attention to that they were tileable textures. These are square textures that have repeating patterns in them. So as I set these up and stack them next to each other, they'll tile naturally. Now, if I want to make these cubes a little bit bigger, in the case of the stone tile, oops, I wanted to do the stone tile. Let me back up here. I'll grab the stone object, and I'll bump this up to a scale of 2. Now I have a larger cube to play with here. I still want to position this according to a grid. So I'm using the numeric value here to place this. And now if I duplicate this, if I want to stack this, I'll change this axis. I'll just add 2 to it because that's the scale of the object, and so now it's stacked end to end. In addition to using the numeric values according to the position, we can also use a snap setting. So if I were to duplicate this cube once again, on a Mac, if I hold down the Command key and I Command, click, and drag, you'll see that as I drag that, that cube is snapping as it moves. Okay, and it's snapping according to a specified increment. If I go up under Edit, and I go to Snap Settings, I can adjust, and currently it's moving 1 meter in X, Y, and Z, and I can change those. But I actually like that setting, so if I hold down the Command key and I click and drag, it's probably the Control key on a Windows setup, but this will allow you to be pretty intuitive about building a quick environment. So I could build up an asset, using these simple assets, and again, the concept is that I want to build kind of a voxel style map, and I've made a reference to voxels here. It's kind of popularized recently by Minecraft. It's building an environment based on a series of cubes to build a volumetric environment. So take a look at that. This is just one strategy to experiment with. In the next presentation, I'll talk to you about building some custom assets inside Cinema 4D and translating those into your environment. So play with the materials, play with this cube strategy, and we'll push that forward, and I'll use that as the basis for my level 1 for my marble game. We'll catch up in the next presentation.